But again, the 99.9% of the cops who aren't doing that are just going to have to understand that the blue line can now be broken, and you will be prosecuted, and you are going to have to open your mouth.
And how do you think morale is now for the police? I mean, I read things like the Berkeley College of Music said they were deeply sorry that they let the police use the restrooms during the protest, and it wouldn't happen again. You know, obviously a lot of work has to be done to reform the police, but you know, I don't know if we're going in the right direction here when we treat police like that.
Exactly, Bill. I mean, here's the thing. There are very practical things we can do to help police reform. There's bipartisan support for many of those things. But what's happened in this debate over the last couple of weeks is the fervor and the moral panic that has taken place has helped people lose their reason. This is all emotion. This is mob feeling. This is occluding any kind of nuance, any kind of practical point. When I hear the cops in general, without any distinguishing between the good and the bad cops, being described as all cops are bastards, when I hear the kind of rhetoric you're getting from some people on the left about defunding the police, treating the police constantly as the enemy, this is not how most Americans feel about the police. They want reform, but they don't want to hear this kind of rhetoric of really hatred of the cops who are doing a hard job. And look, over the last 25 years, we have seen an extraordinary decrease in crime. It's probably one of the most successful periods of crime reduction, and no one gives them credit for that. It seems that they can't win a lot of the time. I'm not excusing in any way the misconduct of the few, but the left has gone nuts over the last couple of weeks, and they need to calm down to realize there is a consensus in favor of reform and stop demonizing the cops, stop running a campaign on defunding the police, and stop this excessive rhetoric about we all live in a white supremacy and all white people have to confess their guilt. This kind of moral panic and indeed a sort of orthodoxy that's taking place is unhealthy for democracy. We need to have open debate. We need to be able to respect one another. And there's a kind of really McCarthyite feel in the air right now, in which dissenting opinions are not respected.
To be honest, I'm not sure if it's McCarthyite. I think there has been this big sway to the extreme for some people. The average person on the street, though, now understands what they've been missing. Okay, I'm an African-American male. I have relatives who have been pulled over by police, who have been unnecessarily profiled. It's just that there is a mindset within a very small fraction of law enforcement officers that they are engaged in this struggle again, and when they go into Black communities, they behave one different way, right? Like they're going through the second battle of Fallujah, like everybody is armed, everything is bad. Then when they go into a white neighborhood and they meet the exact same crisis, they assume that even if you have firearms, you're legal. Even if you're beating your wife, it can be negotiated out. The public is now seeing for the first time real evidence of that. And I think that the American public, couple it with COVID-19, whatever you want to say, they've just had enough of that. But
yes, it's not the American public we're talking about here. We're talking about a group of woke activists who are holding much of journalism and the media by the throat, really, that if the op-ed editor of the New York Times can't run a piece making a case that if law and order breaks down entirely, maybe the military should be sent in, if he can't make the case, if he can't run a piece saying that and not get fired because the entire newsroom rebels against it, there are all sorts of magazines and newspapers in which there are purges going on. People are being put on lists. This is incredibly unhealthy and toxic atmosphere, and many of us are having a very hard time being able to make ourselves heard or seeing so much of the mainstream press shift massively and suddenly to the left without any nuance at all. This is not good for the Democrats. It's not good for the left. It's something that these problems have to be dealt with, absolutely. But take a breath and stop demonizing people who disagree with you. And
I agree.
Their opinions.
I agree to a certain extent, but just remember, Twitter is not America. It is not the world. The stuff that we're seeing in parts of the media even the people who are coming out with, defund police. What people want to see is they want to see a police force that protects and serves. And I personally, I want to see more of the cops who do deeper community policing, a very British way of policing where law enforcement is trusted. And what's happened is we have had a breakdown of trust. Forget the extreme voices on both sides of the aisle. We don't need militiamen and we don't need to defund entire police organizations. What we need is a mindset change of the individual officer so that escalation of force is not a death sentence, so that the escalation of force is reasonable and that it is equal opportunity, so that if you pull somebody over who has a handgun and a concealed carry license and he's white, and you look at his concealed carry license and you see his handgun secure, you're not going to shoot a black man with a concealed carry license. This is where the disparity is happening, is my skin color gets me treated like I am a threat. And we heard this in the Albuquerque protest, where white armed militiamen were called armed friendlies and the protesters were the enemy. That mindset has to be changed, and has to be changed across the board by all officers so that every American is seen as an equal person that they serve.
But my concern is that the most important thing for all of us right now is to make sure that Donald Trump is not reelected. The Democrats have to do virtually nothing, as I think Bill has often said, than be nuts. You set up communes in the middle of cities. If you call for defunding the police, if you tell people that this multicultural, multiracial society is no different than the antebellum South, is a white supremacy, if you tell every white person in the country that they themselves are guilty of being the equivalent of slave owners, you're not going to get a consensus. You're going to alienate a lot of people. You're going to sound extreme. You're going to have to push Biden to disown you. There's a consensus for reform, but the extreme rhetoric is unsettling that, and it's alienating more people than I think liberals in their bubble understand. And you don't want this to be another 1968. You don't want to elect Nixon. You don't want to re-elect Trump.
If I could jump in just for a second. It does seem like there is a debate going on, certainly on the left, about whether we are irredeemable or whether we are savable. I mean, you guys keep talking about defund the police. The New York Times, you mentioned, Andrew, they ran a column this week, and the title, I'm going to give it to you, "Yes, we mean literally abolish the police." They're not talking about defunding. This is the New York Times. It's not a fringe operation. And as you point out, the one that just fired a guy and made him apologize and go to a labor camp in Mongolia for doing something wrong. We literally mean abolish the police. These are the folks, there are people who believe that things in this country cannot be saved. Now, I don't think this was the view of Barack Obama or certainly of Martin Luther King, but that's sort of where we are, a place where I thought we were moving toward more integration 5 years ago. People were intermarrying more, true friendships between the races, which of course leads to more understanding, more dialogue. Now I think people, we're so on eggshells that I don't know if that's going to move that in the right direction. And I thought that was the right direction.
Well, if Democratic Party leaders are not calling for these things, Joe Biden himself came out and said, no, reform, sure, repair, reimagine, right, whatever you want to say. But let's just put the New York Times into perspective. This is the same New York Times that allowed Tom Cotton to write a kooky op-ed. So I guess they decided that they would balance that out with another kooky op-ed. No one is defunding the police. No one is going to take away all the money and get rid of cops and go around with community support officers. It's not happening. That is someone's pie in the sky, and it's managed to make itself into a meme. We are talking about doing common sense reimagining, right? Reimagining, re-engineering, facilitating them, maybe increasing their budgets.
There's a real difference between two positions here. One is that America is forever evil, that it's constructed as a white supremacy built on slavery, that it's entirely a neo-colonial, wicked, imperialist venture that can never be saved. And the other is that it was probably the most amazing place for human freedom and equality, marred and deeply undermined by its inheritance of the poisonous evil of slavery, and that we have spent the last 2, 3, 4 centuries overcoming that in a way that we can talk to one another. And not, if you make race totally central to your worldview, if all that matters about someone is they're black or white, you can't help, even though you're trying to end racism, but to perpetuate it. We get along better in races when we're not talking about race, when we're talking about things, other things that we love, that we have in common, that we share. And I'm an immigrant, so I'm going to be naive about this country, but I do not believe it's evil in its DNA. I do not believe it's a thoroughly racist country. I think there are some awful inheritances, but I look at where we are now. I look at where gay people are now. Even when you see the problems in the African-American community, you could also see huge success in so many fields of activity. So I'm an Obama supporter. I am not a supporter of BLM, which is really an extreme left-wing organization.
Well, let me agree with you on one thing, is that I am a child of the American experiment. I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I believe in everything deeply, deeply in my heart that was written down at 5th and Chestnut Street and ratified into the Declaration of Independence. And I've spent my entire life defending every person in this country, regardless of race, creed, or stupid comment that they make on Twitter. But I will tell you, you are right on both parts. We do have some evils in there. My family, I don't even understand how every Nance since 1864 has served in the armed forces. Everyone right now. I've got a niece who's still in the military. We believe in the American experiment. We know it goes 3 steps backwards, 1 step forward, but we want to defend that 1 step forward. No, look, you're an immigrant, you're a Brit. Maybe, you're American now, so you're one of us, or, your turncoat. But, your belief in this system is not as deeply ingrained as mine. And to be quite honest, mine is literally skin deep. Those past oppressions, those past errors, I'm literally sitting here in Richmond, Virginia, the heart of the Confederacy, that must be recalibrated. And to be honest, the Civil War didn't end. We're actually seeing what could have really is a 100-year reconciliation process taking place now. We're finally getting rid of the statues. We need to rename those bases. We need to understand and demonstrate to the African-American community that, okay, fair playing field now. Just because we elected Barack Obama doesn't mean that racism is over. Racism is rearing its ugly head, and it has a national leader who, without any question to me, and I'm being fair because I've seen, potentates and dictators around the world, is a white supremacist. He will not rule the nation. He rules a tribe who he has promised will dominate all other tribes. I'm sorry, that needs to be recalibrated, and we are having that moment. Are we in a 1964 moment? Yes. 68 moment? Yes. Are we going to have to go through the Watts riots? And I don't like any of that stuff. All right? But the dialogue time is now. But again, get rid of all those people.
Dialogue, then.
Don't listen to those people who are extremists.
All right. Let me ask
about
one.
Senator, the Jim Clyburns, and the Joe Bidens.
Look, I don't even think most African Americans are anywhere near as extreme to the left as many of these white liberals. In fact, the polling is showing that.
They don't represent us.
These white liberals are in a woke-off against each other to prove their own virtue, to shame and also get a score on their peers and their competitors. This is an inter-elite strife going on, largely between white people. And some of it just needs to stop.
Okay, we're running out of time. Can I ask one more question? Because you mentioned the monuments. We don't have time.